you'll get something stating you that I am recording for you to know. Awesome. Okay, so we're going ahead and start. I want to welcome all of you. I want to first thank you for taking your time on a Thursday night. I know it's at 7 o'clock. It's prime time and you're taking it for me. So thank you. I know this is the prime time. And if you're in Puerto Rico, it's 8 o'clock. And if you're somewhere else, I don't know what time it is. But I just want to say thank you for taking your time to be this 1 hour with me and with this wonderful team that we have here. And just to let you know, as all you know, you're here because you already know me. My name is Antonio Javier Ortiz Guzman. Everybody calls me Javi, so just call me Javi from now on. I'm doing this as part of my last step to finish my doctorate of ministry. I started my doctorate of ministry in the in Wesley Theological Seminary. I did my master's in Seminario Evangelical Seminary of Puerto Rico. But this, I'm doing my doctorate of ministry from Wesley Theological Seminary. So all this is the culmination of that doctorate of ministry. And I have to give thanks to Wesley Theological Seminary. You know, every year they pick around 13 military persons and give them a free doctorate. We only pay the fees and all that stuff, but they choose around 13 or 15 people around our military from Army, Navy, all of them, and they give us a free doctorate. And I think even more than that. Even they may choose 20 or 25 and do different cohorts. So that's what it is. So I'm doing this for that doctorate of ministry. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start a little presentation here. And it's going to be real cool because you'll still be able to see me. So I can still be able to have that interaction with you. Give me thumbs up. Can you see my slides, right? And you can see my wonderful bald head and shiny hair with a light on top of me and all that stuff. So this is and I'm excited because this is the last chapter for me to do this presentation that I'll be talking about the project that I created. It's a 100-page project with around a few slides that I created. And the topic that I chose is dealing with trauma and grief in the military, leadership through crisis. It's a long title, right? But before I start, this is what's going to happen. I'm going to be telling you a little bit of what is included in this project. I'll be talking around 30 to 40 minutes to you. And then the last 20 minutes, I want to have an interaction with you. I want to have your thoughts. I want to know what do you think? What would you see, what would you like to be added, like for future studies? What would you like me to add to the project in the future? So again, I'll be me giving you a presentation of, I'm not going to tell you everything's in the project. I'm just going to show you a little bit. And if you like it, I'll give you access to the actual 100-page document that is created. And there's always slides. There's around 50 slides that goes with this training that I can always give to you. And you can use it however you see fit for your ministry and for your point of view. So that's what we're going to do here today. But first, the first part of the project of my writings always starts with a dedication. And I dedicated this project to my wife, Kayla, to my children. It was a lot of nights and weekends that I had to be working on this and not with them. So I want to thank them for their patience, for their love, through all this process. And life is enjoyable because I'm with them. And not only do I thank my wife, Kayla, and my kids, Jada and Joshua and Jesse, but also my mom, my dad, my sister.
Did we lose him?
Yes, I'm contacting him.
Okay, I'm gonna go get my other glasses so I can see.
I think we lost him. His internet had issues, I guess. Give me a second.
Got it. I'm back. Everybody sees me, right?
Yeah. Yeah, we see you now. Go ahead.
It's China. They're always hacking our stuff and all that stuff, but just kidding. Let's do this. There we go. We're back, right? Okay. So again, going back to my grandmother, she only had a 5th grade education, but she always taught us with quotes and all that. And there's a quote that she said that I thought it describes my project. There's a quote that she would say, and it is dangerous to be alive. That's a quote that she would say, it is dangerous to be alive. My grandmother in Spanish, es un peligro estar vivo. It is dangerous to be alive. And it comes so much with this project when we deal with trauma and grief and with life and with military. So I want to make sure that although she had a 5th grade education, she was such a blessing to me, to my cousins, to everybody in our life that she made it to the first page of a doctorate program project. So I want to make sure her name was there for eternity. So that's why I wanted to say that little part of it, that it was there. So dealing with trauma and grief. As we go to the next one is, why did I choose this topic? Of all the topics that I can do as a chaplain, why did I decide to talk about trauma and grief? Well, here's a few things. The Chief of the Air Force, he gave a directive. In his directive, accelerate, change, or lose, this is what he said, or this is what is important for him. He says, tomorrow's airmen are more likely to fight in highly contested environments and must be prepared to fight throughout combat attrition rates and risk to the nation that are more akin to the World War II era than the uncontested environment to which we have since become accustomed to. That's a lot of military terms. But let me tell you in simple terms, what does he mean? We are trained to fight like Iraq and Afghanistan, where we may have a death here, a death there, and we control the environment, we control the airspace, we control a lot of things. But he says, but maybe with the new peer-to-peer, or what that means is if we have to go to a big power like China, Russia, or these other places, are we ready, or are we ready to fight with the kind of death that we saw in World War II? That's what attrition rates mean, that kind of death that we saw in World War II. Is our military ready for that? Is our commanders ready to deal with the trauma and grief that that will bring? So that brings me to my next slide. And I was looking here, and in World War II, because remember, that's where the Chief of the Air Force is comparing. World War II, there were 407,316,000 deaths, almost 400,000 deaths. And this is just a U.S. serviceman. This is not the whole world. This is a U.S. There was 400,000 deaths. And then when you look at the wounded, there's 671,000 of wounded. So my question is our commanders, is our E5 sergeants, is our military leaders ready to deal with the kind of trauma and grief that this many deaths will bring? When we take an airplane and may not ever come back full of airmen, or so that is, if we're preparing for that kind of event that may happen, and God permits it doesn't, I don't know if we're prepared anymore to deal with that kind of trauma and grief that brings. And when we look at the other one, strategic priority, the Air Force Reserve, I am a chaplain for the Air Force Reserve. I work full-time for the Air Force Reserve. So our head, our chief, Air Force Reserve Command Chief, Lieutenant General John Healy, his 2 priorities are ready now and transforming for the future. We got to be ready now. You know, it used to be, we'll have 6 months to get ready, a month. No, he wants for the reserve and for the kind of battle that we may go into with this power that they can reach us, our homeland, anytime with supersonic weapons, with all this stuff. So we have to be ready now. Sometimes we may not have 6 months to go to a place to get ready and to power our forces, those days are gone now. So we have to be ready now and transforming, and we have to be able to transform for the future. And that's what I'm trying to do with preparing our leaders to deal with the trauma and grief that this chaos may bring. Or if we get attacked in the homeland, that trauma and grief that will bring to the table. And then look at the other one. Dr. Bergman states that trauma is more prevalent than people think. And PTSD is the world's largest epidemic. And it's interesting, we're going to talk about trauma and grief. And most people, when they think about trauma and grief, they say, well, that only happens when something big happens in my life. But later we're going to learn that trauma and grief is more common than what we think. And many times trauma and grief in different levels happens in every seasons in our life, and we don't know it. So that's what we're going to look a little bit more. You may think, oh, this is trauma and grief is only for if we go to battle. No, in reality, us humans, because remember my grandmother Juanita said it's dangerous to be alive. We deal with trauma and grief in every season in our lives, but we don't know it. And that's another thing that I want to bring up. So the reason I chose this is because our general says we have to be ready for this new kind of battle with peer-to-peer. Also because I found out through all these studies that we deal with trauma and grief almost in every day in life, but in our culture, it's not common to talk about it. It's not common to discuss it. It's something that is hidden, and then we cannot heal properly. So that's the reason that I chose to do this about trauma and grief. And it's to give them a tool inside their toolbox. This is not going to cure all diseases. It's one tool in the toolbox. Another important point about this training, when I give it out and where I gave it to commanders and I gave it to all these other people, this training does not prepare you to heal or function, or you to function as a psychologist, as a counselor for trauma and grief. It just helps you to initially deal with it as a commander, as a first responder, as a chaplain, but does not prepare you to be a counselor. So half of the job that I do as a chaplain is passing the people to the right helping agency, to either a counselor, a psychiatrist. So that's the first caveat to this training, is to give you, to help you deal with it initially in the front lines until we can get them to the proper help and professional help that they need. So that's very important. So let me give you a little bit of what is it that I train the commanders in, what is it that I train chaplains in when I give this training. And this training, you also can give it yourself after you read and you go through the slides and all that stuff. So I try to explain, there's so much work out there about trauma and grief. But see, our commanders, they only have a few, 1 hour or two. You know, when I first started this, I want to say, you know what? I want to do a whole day retreat and have commanders, have chaplain corps personnel, and just let me just give them all this training in one day. There is no one day. Either you do it in an hour and a half, or you don't get to do anything. So that's how I started. So I had to let me see what I can put that in an hour and a half or two, they can have enough to want to study more about it and actually have at least some tools to initially deal with that. Because remember, commanders, they're the one who does the death notifications. The chaplains go with them, but they're the one who has to tell the news. They're the one who has to be there from the beginning. So commanders at all levels are dealing with trauma and grief, even if they're in the battlefield or not. So this is a few things that I talk about when I talk about trauma and grief. The first one, trauma means wound in Greek. Trauma is a wound. A wound can be physical, emotional, mental, social, or spiritual. And another important concept about knowing about trauma, not only that it's a wound, but trauma is a response. The American Psychological Association describes trauma as an emotional response to a terrible event like an accident, rape, or natural disaster. So here's the thing. Trauma is not the event. Trauma is the response that the human have to that event. And that is so important. And when I talk about trauma or wound, many people, they think, oh, something horrible had to happen. But we have all kinds of wounds. I know 2 days ago, I was playing basketball with my daughter. And I was playing basketball with my daughter's and son, and she scraped my head with her nails. And I had a wound. And I can see the scrape. Now, did it alter my life? It didn't. Did it hurt at the moment? Yes. Does it hurt now? It doesn't. But it was a wound that it had to heal. And I had to recognize and deal with. You see, in humanity, there's a lot of things that wounds us. But because they're not really deep, we don't want to deal with them. But trauma, there's things that happens in our emotional, mental, social, or spiritual daily life that wounds us. But because it may be small, we are resilient and it heals. But there's some wounds that we can't heal on ourselves, that we need extra help, that we need a community to help us heal. So again, and this is very important for commanders. Sometimes when a big event happens, something negative happens, the commanders go to the chaplain or their psychologist. Hey, I want you to give briefings to everybody. I want you to bring everybody in a room and make them talk about it. Make them just see what's going on because they must be traumatized. You don't know that. Just an event does not cause trauma. It's the response to the event, and everybody is different. And then we deal with that a little bit more. So that's so very important. A lot of people don't understand that trauma is not an event, it's the response to an event that people have. So let's go to another one. And like I said, at the end of all this, there'll be a time that I want you to talk. You can tell me, you can ask me questions or things that you really liked or things you wish I would talk more about. So what is trauma? This is trauma. A traumatic event is an attack on one's meaning system, which comprises of at least 5 factors. And again, this came from Alan Brody on his spiritual and traumatic during times of war. Spirituality and trauma during times of war. This is where he came up. It says, what one believes about the universe, the nature of reality, one's relationship to the universe and reality, the research of meaning within the reality, and then one's view of understanding oneself with the concept of reality. Let me explain this in simple terms. There's a lot of terms there. Let me do it simple. We have a way of seeing the world. We have our paradigms. And we are made to change. You know, my thought process have changed. The older I get, I think differently sometimes. When I take a class, I think differently. My spirituality made me think differently. So we change over time, and that's okay. What may cause the traumatic event is if the way we see the world changes in a moment or an instant, our brain, our emotions, our psyche go into shock, and that may cause trauma. So trauma is not that our mindset changed. We all changed. That's part of humanity. But it's when we changed in an instant and we have nothing to replace it with. Let me give you an example of how this can happen. Today, we have the ability to take an airman, a guardian, a soldier, a sailor, put them in a plane, and they came from 30 minutes being in their room playing Fortnite, playing Wii, Xbox. We put them in a plane, and in 1 hour, they're in a battlefield where everything changes, where they can see the worst of humanity, where they can see the chaos that happens, when they can see blood, death, they can smell everything, when everybody is just worried about, can we survive today? So when we put an airman in our plane and we put them from one day and the next day, they're in this total battlefield and the world changed completely, are they propensed to have a traumatic event? A traumatic response to that event? Yes, because it happens so fast. You can see this in natural disasters too. Why natural disaster? When a hurricane comes and it destroys your house and it destroys everything. One day you have your house and in an instant it's gone. Your mind, your social, your emotions cannot gravitate to your new reality. It takes time. So you see what is a traumatic event, what may cause a traumatic event. It's that changing. It's that completely changing or your paradigms get destroyed in an instant and you haven't replaced it yet. It's too fast for you to replace it. That may also cause a traumatic response. Here's another one, a traumatic response. What is it? I look at DSM-5, that's like the psychologist handbook, and I want to focus on the word threatened. So trauma is not only something that happened to you, but it was like a close call, or you felt threatened by it. That's so important, especially for our military. And I'm going to tell you why. You remember the movie Top Gun, not the new one, which was good too, with Tom Cruise, but remember the first Top Gun when we were growing up? Now that was the greatest movie at all times, right? I remember Top Gun. Do you remember the first part of Top Gun? Do you remember Maverick and Goose? And you probably do, because Maverick was, that was the main character, and Goose died at the end. Everybody's so sad. Tom Cruise was Maverick. But at the beginning of the movie, there's a pilot named Cougar. And that pilot named Cougar, he was the best of the best. And then Maverick, or Tom Cruise, was the second. So two fighter pilots came in and went to the airspace, getting too close to the airspace in the United States. So they send these two pilots, Cougar and Maverick, to go and fight those other planes. Well, to tell the story short, Cougar almost gets shot down, but he didn't get shot down. He was okay. They survived. The other two jets, they left, so they went back. But Cougar was so distraught by just the possibility of being killed and not seeing her children, not seeing his wife, that he even couldn't land his plane back in the air carrier, right? Aircraft carrier. So when he goes into to see the commander, he takes off his wings and he gives it to them. And he says, you know what? I'm stopped. I'm not flying no more. I'm leaving the Navy. He says, how are you gonna leave? You're the best one. This was just a close call. Get over it. No, I almost never saw my wife and children. So Cougar didn't say it, but he had what? A traumatic response to a close call, to a threatened event. He got trauma and he had to leave. He didn't want to deal with it. So when our military members go outside, a lot of them do not have like a bullet through their hand. They weren't shot at, but they went out in all these areas, and the threat, they saw other people get shot at. They saw that the convoy, other places of the convoy got exploded. So just that threat of being there, of actually almost being died, that enough is enough to cause trauma in a person. We see that also in the airplanes. How many people are afraid of flying? And if you're afraid of flying, it's because you're still alive and you're not dead. So if you're afraid, it's because you're not dead. And many people are afraid of flying. It's because probably what? They got some turbulence. They got a close call. But that threat was good enough to give them that response, or have a traumatic response to an event. So commanders have to realize that when somebody comes and they don't see a normal, an airman, just because that airman wasn't shot and they stop bleeding doesn't mean that he cannot have trauma or she cannot have trauma because of something that may have happened or they had a close call. So that's something the commanders should know. So here's another one. When does it occur? When does trauma occurs? This is when it occurs. Trauma occurs when a person's vulnerability exceeds their internal and external source of support and stabilization. That comes from Serena Jones' Trauma plus Grace Theology. So trauma occurs when a person's vulnerability exceeds their internal and external source of support and stabilization. So as chaplain, we have a saying. We want to be able to help you before the bang. We want to be able to give you the tools to develop a strong internal and external source of support. We do it through healthy connection. We do it through teaching you soft skills. We can do it teaching you this training, this 1 hour training or an hour and a half training. You see, the person who may get the most traumatic response to an event is because their vulnerability, their internal external sources of support has been overwhelmed. So the higher or the stronger your internal external sources of support, the less likely you are to have a traumatic response. It makes so much sense, right? So as chaplain, that's why we're constantly going to the airmen, constantly going to our military personnel. Hell, let us help you. Let us create you strong. Let's say, Chaplain, if I need you, I'll call you. I got you, buddy. But it's too late then. They're always meeting us after the bang. We want to prepare you before the bang, before those events happen, so you have the tools to properly deal and absorb the shock a little more. Interesting, right? So internal coping system, that's what we want to work with. All people doesn't respond the same. Let me give you another one. In the book, Trauma and Transformation at Ground Zero, Dr. Swain was a doctor that after 9/11 and Ground Zero, he was there. He was one of the chaplains there, and he was given support for many weeks and months to all the first responders, everybody that's working in that area. Every time they pick up a body, they find a body part. So he was there. And this is what he came out. This is a lesson that he learned. This is what he said. If one has a worldview that is inclusive of disastrous event, one is less likely to be traumatized by them. So he went around and he would talk to first responders. And then he would see that there were some first responders that the event was more traumatic than others. But he tried to look at what is it that they have in common, everybody that were able to deal more with the traumatic event that happens, with those who could deal less. He saw that those who could handle the traumatic event better, they had a worldview that bad things sometimes happen in life. And sometimes, as bad as that looks, sometimes that's normal. Those people with that worldview were more apt to deal with the chaos that happened in 9/11 and Ground Zero. Isn't that interesting? That's what you're able to see. So I learned that lesson with my kids. You know, now I used to hide the fact that life is hard sometimes. We want to make everything good for our kids. Are you hungry? Here's the hamburger. Hey, are you tired? Here, go to sleep. Are you having trouble with your teacher? Or is your teacher the bad one? It's not you. No. I learned that, hey, if I want them to be healthy, I got to tell them life is hard. But in the midst of this, it's great too. See, I want to prepare them now so when hard times come, it doesn't caught them off guard. And I remember the song that it said, Mama said there will be days like this. There will be hard days. There will be hard days, Mama say. And I think that that's what we're missing with our generation. We want to tell a generation that life can be so peaceful, so perfect. And then when it really isn't, because it's not, when they face real life, it takes them by shock. And then we may have anxiety. We may have all this stuff because they have a bad worldview that life somehow is perfect, that life is not hard. And I'm sorry I'm going back to my grandmother, but it's dangerous to be alive. And that's okay. We still can have joy in the midst of it. You guys okay still? It's not okay. Make sure it's not. So that's it about trauma. I went through a whole trauma. I want to do the last 10 minutes of grief, but there's a bunch of other stuff that I teach a commander. I give them tools. These are tools that you can do to deal with trauma with your airmen. And that's in my project. And you can look at that. I give them more example what trauma is, how to combat trauma. But this is just a few of the things that I bring to them. I try to bring things that are simple, that they can apply that hour after. And again, this training is not designed to make you a psychologist. It's not designed that now you can treat trauma and grief. You cannot treat it. You cannot, but you can deal with it until you get to that person, until you get to that space that you can do it. So that's trauma. Let me use this last 10 minutes to tell you a little bit about the grief. Time has flies, so I want to use the last 20 minutes so I can talk with you and have this time of conversation. So I also talk about grief because just like trauma, a lot of people does not realize it, that they're going through it. Grief is the same way. What is grief? Grief is understood as one response to an important loss. This response is sometimes marked by severe and prolonged distress. So when you look at what grief is, grief means a loss. In our society, we see grief as when somebody died. That's the only time we have grief, when somebody died, right? Or when somebody went through a horrible accident. But in reality, grief is much more. Grief is a loss. That's what grief is. And let me show you this part. And this is something that also has helped me greatly in my ministry. There's different types of loss that can give you grief. There's material, relationship, dream, functional, roles, and systemic loss. And let me put this in everyday life. Let me put, for example, a loss. Let's put relationship loss. Every time in the military, sometimes you have to move every 3 or 4 years. And that means that you're ripping away your children, your family from their friends, from their everyday. They're having a loss. Before a PCS, you have to realize that sometimes that family may be going through the grief process. Those kids, those 5 and 6, they may not know it. They're mad. They start acting out. They start doing, but they don't know it's because they know they're moving. And that loss, if they had a great friend, if they had a great school, that hurts. And they're going through all the stages of grief and they don't know it. All the mom and dad says, why are you acting that way? What's going on? Material. Sometimes when you have something special that somebody gave it to you, a ring, something, it gets lost, or you lose it, or it breaks. It brings you grief. It brings you a loss. And you say, why I'm so sad nobody died? It's a loss. And the body and your emotion functions the same way for that loss. Relationship, divorce. One of the hardest things that humans go through is divorce, because you never thought you were going to be separated from that person. That's a loss. That's like you have the same pain of grief like somebody died, because that relationship is there no more. That connection is there no. That's a loss. You may be married and you lost your connection with your husband or your wife, with your partner, with your spouse, and it's not the same. You're still living together, but you're going through the grief process because you know that relationship broke. It's not the same. So you'll be going through all the sadness, the stages of grief, dream, functional loss. Let me give you one example that has like 3 of them. In my counseling as a chaplain, I get airmen that comes to me. And I had this young airman that came to me and they're having knee problem. And because of the knee problem, they may have kicked him out of the Air Force. They don't know what they're going to work in next. And the person was really sad. Well, I know this class because I went through this class. But if I look at him, how many losses does that person has? First, has the dream loss. The dream of that person was to make it in the Air Force, be 20 years, to have a career, to make it up to be a senior master sergeant, a chief. That dream is gone. Functional loss. It can't run no more. I used to run and do all this exercise and I can't anymore. Now that person has functional loss. A role loss. I wear this uniform. I'm in the United States Air Force. I'm not that no more. I'm not Sergeant so-and-so no more. That's a role loss. Other also. So you see how we can apply this? Well, see when I tell you that as humans, we go in many stages in our life, we go through grief, we go through trauma, and we don't know it. And you know what I did to help that airman? And you know, it's great when you go in through these counseling sessions as a chaplain, you can see when the person's eyes light up. When you can see when their face, they say it changes. So you know what I did? I just went through this. Hey, there's this study that talks about grief. And I explained to him, grief means loss. We experience the same symptoms, the same trauma of grief. Not just because somebody dies, but there's material loss, there's functional loss, there's role loss. And we may be going through all the stages of grief, of the emotional grief, and we don't even know it. That's what's happening to you. I never say, is that you? I ask him, is that what's happening to you? And that light lighted up. His face light up. And they said, wow, that's exactly how I'm feeling. I didn't know it. I was going to grief and I didn't know it. And a smile came on. So I didn't fix the issue. They probably would still be kicked out. They probably still, the knee is all messed up. But when you name your pain, that's the first sign of victory. I was able to put a name to the pain of the person. And that was a sign of victory. So let me tell you something. We all go through different seasons in life. And you know who goes through that too? People with Alzheimer's. I can go on. I don't have time, but I can go on and on how this is so important in our life. My grandmother, Juanita Muñiz, had Alzheimer's. And it came to a point that she would remember things that happened 40 years ago, but she wouldn't remember things that happened 10 years ago with Alzheimer's. And, you know, sometimes she would be with my mom and my aunt, and she would say, hey, where's Onofre? That is my grandfather. She had died 7-8 years ago. So we tell her, but Mama, he died. He died 7 years ago, and we buried him. But why nobody tell me? How's that going to happen? She starts crying and going through all the stages of grief. Then the next day she asks about Pastora. Pastora is her mom. She says, hey, I want to go home now. I want to go with Pastora. The your mom is dead a long time ago. But how's this going to be? And she starts crying again. So she goes to the stages of grief every day. So they came to a day they had to lie to her. Yeah, she's just she's buying something. She'll be back soon. And then 10 minutes she'll forget about the conversation. But we're not going to. So my aunt and my mom, while they were taking care of her, they were going through the stages of grief. And you would say, just be grateful that you still have her and she's alive. No, you lost that connection with her. You lost that role, that function that she had in her body, in herself. She's there, but she's not there. So people that take care of other people, elderlies, they're going through the stages of grief, even the person that hasn't died, because all this losses. Isn't this interesting? How as humans, we go through all the stages of grief at all time, and we don't even know it. Another one, the fog. Some people that were going through the process of bereavement stated that we're in a fog or being confused or having impaired thinking process, including forgetfulness and absent-mindedness. I know some of us live in a constant fog. That's different. But bereavement, it puts a fog. You can't think straight. You can't see straight. You don't have the energy. Now in war, I'm looking at the picture, they call the fog of war, because in war, it's fog because it's chaos. You don't understand everything. It's literally, there's fog because of all the bullets and all that stuff, but there's also so imagine if an airman or a military personnel is going to bereavement and have the fog of bereavement plus has the fog of battle. Now that's crazy. Imagine how confused that airman still has to function in the midst of that chaos. But again, knowing what grief is and knowing that it does bring fog and all that knowledge helps them deal and clear a little bit of the fog away. So, and why do I mention this? Again, I'm going to stop there with trauma and grief. I'm going to go to the next one because we're running out of time. I want to give you some times. The third part of this project is theological. It is a theological school. This part of the project, usually I do not give it to the, I do not expose it to the commanders and all that stuff. I just do this with chaplain corps personnel, this part of theology. It's trauma-sensitive theology. When we read the Bible, when we see our faith, we see it through lenses. We see it through all lenses. You know, when you go in and get your eye checked, you go to say, this lens or this one, and then it takes another lens. You see better with this one or this one or two, and then moves another lens. So trauma-sensitive theology is like putting an extra lens on you and read the Bible and read our Christianity, our faith, through the lens of trauma-sensitive theology. I'm just giving you an extra lens for you to interpret the Bible. Trauma-sensitive theology is a combination of reformation of past theology, which is then fused with new scientific findings to help people experience a traumatic experience or response. So let me give you some example. Gaps. Gaps in the text are missing details and silent characters. The binding of Isaac. Do you remember the story of Abraham and Isaac? That Abraham was going to sacrifice Isaac, but he didn't tell him, because every time they're going up the mountain, Isaac would ask him, hey, where's the animal we're going to sacrifice? Oh, just God will provide. Come on. He didn't know he was the animal that was going to be sacrificed. So they put him. Abraham was about to kill him in that area. And it was till the last minute, if we follow the scriptures, that God said, hold on. Okay, now I know that I'm number one in your life. But have you ever asked about the trauma that that event might have caused in Isaac? Of being almost murdered by his own dad, by being placed that way and being killed in that way? What consequence did that have in his life and his treatment with his brothers or other places? So sometimes we don't tend to look at read between the lines about trauma in the Bible text. There's another example, the slave girl in 2 Kings 5. So 2 King, it was Nahum was this great general that he took this slave girl from Israel to work for him in a battle. He brought him over. And then he got leprosy. And then the slave girl that was an Israelite said, hey, I know this prophet, right, Elijah, and he can cure you from your leprosy. And then you asked, why is this girl, where was the mom of this girl? Was she dead? Did they kill her? Where was his dad? Did this girl cry at night because she was away from her mom and family and with this other place, with this other family, that now she's a slave and she's not free no more? Have we ever thought about the trauma that that girl has been going through and how she still went help and helped her captive? And there's a lot of different places that you can keep going at how to look at the trauma that may have caused some of the events in the Bible. I'm running out of time. Let me go to the next one. I want to hear you. So, concept of sin through the trauma-sensitive theology. The concept of sin is the abuse of relational power that causes disruption in the flow of divine energy and presence. So sin is when we cause trauma to other persons. Sin is when we act in that way. And sometimes there's types of sin: interpersonal, systemic, mortal, and ecological sin. I don't have much time to go in it, but in the project, I go more into all of them. All right. Most of the time as Christian, we just focus on the interpersonal sin. But sometimes there can be a government like Hitler and all that can be sinning against their population. So not only sin happens one person to another, institutions also sometimes commit sins. But I don't, and again, let me give you this, and I think the cross of the trauma. The cross reveals a lot about the trauma. You know, when they crucified Jesus, it reads in Matthew 27:45 says, from noon until 3 in the afternoon, darkness came over all the land. So the trauma of Jesus represents the trauma of a lot of people. When people are going through trauma, they feel that they're in darkness. They feel that they're floating out in space. Although they're surrounded by people, they feel alone and abandoned. That's how many people feel when they're going through trauma and grief. So Jesus felt this, an all-encompassing darkness. God can sympathize with human wounds and trauma. Jesus conquered the trauma, though. Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. And that's another interesting part of it. In a TED Talk by Nora McInerney, she says that people don't move on from grief. They move forward with it. People, and we can put that in trauma. People don't move on from trauma, they move forward with it. You know what example is that? Remember Jesus Christ when he resurrected? He resurrected, but then he went to Thomas, hey, put your fingers in my hands. He still had the trauma of the cross, but he still was God and he still functioned and he was still able to be a resurrected body. So look at the trauma and grief in that part, in that sense of life. And again, and the big thing is that in society, we're taught to hide our trauma. And as pastors and theologians, we are to preach more about the Psalm of Lament, create more lament service, talk about more about trauma and grief, because really people are going to it. They're just hiding it. And we can be that voice to bring it out and deal with it. And 2 more slides and we're done. Findings. These are some of the findings that I had. I did a post and a pre and a post to commanders and also chaplain corps personnel, to some of them. And then I asked them, how adequately trained are you in regard to dealing with trauma and grief? You see 54% says somewhat trained, and sufficiently trained 37.5. When you go to the other one, to the post, it doubled. Then I asked him again, after receiving the presentation in trauma and grief, how adequately trained do you feel about dealing with the trauma and grief in today's military environment? And you see that the sufficiently trained jumped almost double with just an hour and a half. And then still 15.9 somewhat trained, so that went really down. And then we see highly trained 50.9%. Now, in an hour and a half, how highly trained are you? I don't know, but that's what they answered. So I'm grateful for it anyways, for their belief in that. And here's another one. It's interesting what also I asked her, what would you want to have extra training in dealing with trauma and grief? You can see that 93% said yes, even commanders and all these people and chaplain corps personnel. And the other one is, I would highly recommend this course to other colleagues. And again, 77% said strongly agree. Here's some anecdotal responses from some lieutenants and captains, and chaplain corps personnel says, I wish I had this training when I was a lieutenant. Again, they deal with a lot of trauma and grief, even in non-combat. I said, I wish I had this training when I was a lieutenant. He was a major at that time. Everyone should receive this training even before they are deployed. This training is valuable for everyday life, not only in possible peer-to-peer conflict. And here's some of the books from biography that I used that again, they informed the project a lot for it. So now, let me stop sharing. I'm sorry, I went over a little bit on it. But again, what are you guys' thoughts? What do you think? Or here's some questions that I have, and you can answer any of them or none, and just do your own. Some of this, how would you use this material in your setting, or which part is most beneficial, or what would you add or you take away? So anything. I'm going to open up for comments first. Any comments right now? Or any thoughts about the project? You can go ahead, unmute yourself, and you can go ahead and give any comments.
Well, I'll give one for it. It was informative because I saw a lot of details around trauma that I didn't know or never considered. And probably the biggest help for me with it was particularly PTSD seems to become a term now that's just out there everywhere. You know, it starts to lose some of its punch or value because, you know, I've been retired for 8 years, but it seems like the military I left, the majority of the members have PTSD, you know, when I read about it. And it just leaves me wondering, like, huh? Yeah. Where are they coming from with, you know, that kind of view? But this helps at least to get an idea why that is. But, you know, still maybe you could address the widespread use of the term to the point of, you know, any term is like that. We can overuse it to the point it starts to lose some of its value. I'm complete. Thanks.
Thank you, John, for your comments. Another person?
Yeah, this is Dr. Martin. Hi, wonderful presentation. I like it. You cover a lot. And I like when you mention trauma, but it's good to add secondary traumatization or being re-traumatized because it happens. Also, post-traumatic growth, when the individual is capable to bounce back and get out of the start point. A wonderful presentation. Congratulations.
Thank you, Dr. Martin. Again, it's interesting, right? How to keep going, how to keep developing after the trauma to go. I like that. Thank you, Dr. Martin.
I have a comment to Javi, and that is when I did the master's degree, I actually did a project similar to this, a smaller version. The one that I had was stress and anxiety on commanders, because, you know, every 2 or 3 years, commanders move on from one place to another location. But what this just made me realize, I didn't think about it from this point of view, is the grief that the people suffer with the loss of their leader. In some cases, it's the joy, but for the most part, it's really the grief that they experience about that. And just like Dr. Martin just mentioned right there, those are the secondary effects in there until you actually briefed her and you brought it up to your attention. it kind of highlighted that for you. So, and I also second that wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. Over.
Also, it's important to address anticipatory grief. That is the sensation, a constellation of emotions that the individual feel knowing that an event is about to happen. So in psychology, we know that as anticipatory grief.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Martin. And that's what we chaplain call, before the bang, trying to get them and ready, because we know the bang is coming in life. We go through bangs. Some are smaller, some are bigger, but we're all going to go through bangs in life. Thank you, Dr. Martin. Yes, another person. Tell me what you guys think.
Bobby, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, John.
So are you saying then are the armed services, are these soldiers taught that they will probably go through grief at one time or another? Are they go into traumatic situations unprepared and therefore unable to cope with grief?
Great question. Great question, John. Right now, that's what when we go through, all our military go through basic training, right? Army go through basic training. Air Force, they all go through their basic trainings, and we've seen the movies. They're not always accurate, but we see it. They put them through stressful situation in these basic trainings, either Army, Navy, ever look at say, and they put them in this stressful situation so they can learn to deal with trauma, that they can deal with grief. It's chaos, everything's going wrong, and that they still can go over it, right? And they still can still succeed in the midst of that. So that's one way they prepare them for that. Also, the military has, like I said, chaplains, they have psychologists, they have all this, and they're getting suicide training. So they're constantly getting a few trainings here and there. So they're constantly training. And what we're doing here, what I'm doing here is giving them an extra tool to deal with it. And again, there is many tools out there. The military is always trying to find how to get them better, how to give them everything they need. There's a big one now. It's about healthy connections, because they know that we need to have the community service. In many places, many of our active duty young military, they feel alone. We take them away from their family. They have a lot of grief, a lot of loss, and we put them in this space away from everywhere. So they're aware of that, and they do try to prepare them for real life events and for being deployed as military. So from their whole career, they are trying to do that. I'm just creating one tool. So it's not that they're not being trained, but thank you for that question, John.
Thank you, Javi.
Anything else do you think I should add to the project, or anything you wish that was discussed here, that it will be discussed more in the military? What do you guys think? Robert, you have your hand up.
This is Alex.
Alex, yes, Alex, go ahead.
Yes. I see that your doctoral presentation focuses on a commander's perspective and tools. And along those lines, I would include the perspective from the basic troop and the basic level airman in understanding trauma and grief. So if that could be incorporated into your program, because as you mentioned, trauma and can stem from being valued, devalued, or discriminated, or like lost hope, as you indicated in your section, and your focus on maintaining a connection to the organization and the team cohesiveness and the impacts of disparities. While we're going into the fog of war and bereavement, it could be happening at the squadron level now, and some commanders may not see it or give it the attention it needs.
Thank you, Colonel Alex, for that. De gracia. It's interesting that when I gave this presentation to the commanders there at the 94th Earlift Wing, OG had a big, they had like 100 people from their section. They have a big family day. They brought everybody in and they gave us an hour to talk about trauma and grief. It is, and again, the same project can be molded to everybody. So we did do it to all the airmen there. Maybe something is new for the flight, right? The new flights for this new airmen, like you're saying there, Colonel De Gracia. I think that's a great idea too. So we have given it to the normal population, not just commanders. It's just, like everybody knows, it's just a matter of time. There's so many requirements. There's so many training. Oh, this is another one, and all that stuff embedded on them. But I know if I know that it will be a blessing, even if it's an hour and a half, because part of this training is not just, oh, okay, I had an hour and a half of training or whatever, but part of it is I'm interested. I'm going to go study more. I'm going to go and dive. So that's part of it. It's not that you received the training, you're an expert now, but now you at least know the important concepts, and now you want to study more. But yes, great. Robert Soto, you had your hand up, please, sir.
Hey, Javi. Yeah, I was going to share. So physical trauma is a lot easier to identify than emotional trauma. And physical trauma is most likely to pave the path for an emotional trauma and its effects. And I think it's very important to be able to identify what are the symptoms of all these emotional traumas, right? And especially in our military forces. Yes, this is important for commanders and leaders to understand, but the people that are closer to the people that are going through all these traumas more than likely are their peers. So I think it's an important factor that this can be shared not only with commanders, but like you said, with everybody else. The dangers of the emotional trauma is that they are not easily identifiable. And when you're going through emotional trauma, that can affect the human psyche. Therefore, it can manipulate and change your beliefs, your convictions, and your values. And there we are venturing into a very dangerous place where people can just negate God, walk away from God, and whatnot. So in the military, it's not a matter of if you're going to encounter trauma, it's a matter of when, based on the different type of traumas that we face when we serve in the United States military. Thank you, Javi.
Thank you, Soto, for that. And the reality is that our airmen will speak to other airmen. So most of the time, we have first sergeants in the Air Force, we have commanders, we have chaplains, but by the time it gets to us, sometimes it's too late. It's because the bomb exploded and now we have to take action. But usually that young 18, 19-year-old airman or military personnel is talking to another 18 or 19-year-old airman personnel. So I like what you both said, Robert and Alex, that if they know about this and they can identify or know at least the basics of trauma and grief, then to be able to hear them and help them and then take them to the professionals so they can get their help. But yes, I hear the important points that usually it is that young airman or that young military personnel that they're the one who's hearing the chaos or seeing what's going on with their counterparts. Thank you. One more, anything else for discussion that you want to bring up?
This is John. Good job, cousin. I think the key is to get people to speak about their experiences, especially when they have a traumatic effect. The talk therapy is key, and that even though it's a very archaic way of dealing with stuff, but in my experience in the military, having people just talk about stuff is therapeutic. But great job, cousin. Very proud of you. Thank you.
And thank you, John, for that. And part of just giving this presentation is that you can actually talk about it. I mean, because everybody's going through it, we just hide it. We're taught in our society to hide the grief and the trauma, or you're only allowed to suffer your grief and trauma if it's something big, like, somebody died or I lost something. But you're almost never given the okay to deal with your trauma and grief when it's not huge, or when you don't want nobody to themselves. So just by giving this presentation or just by talking about it, that will give permission to people that are actually going through that, go ahead and talk about it more and be open about it and actually go get the help. Because, hey, they're talking about it. It's normal. Let's go deal with it now. So I like your idea that, yes, just talking about it, it helps to get that atmosphere for people to be able to talk about it. And it happens in our churches. You know, we've been on churches, and I've been a pastor, and I've been failure of this too. We want to talk about the sermon that feels good. We never want to talk about trauma and grief when it's Good Friday before Sunday. We want to jump Friday to go to Sunday resurrection and enjoy, but we don't stick. We don't talk about it much either in church. So it happens everywhere, even in our churches and all that stuff. Great. Another comment. One last comment or some addition that you guys want to add to the report? I think we have time for just one more.
Hey, Javi. Good evening, everyone. From a retired perspective, as a prior military member in the Air Force, this is awesome training due to the fact that a lot of the training that we receive on the field, it only teaches airmen how to hide their pain and how to hide their issues. It doesn't really show what possible avenues there are available. And the reason for hiding it is the fear of reprisal. What could happen if I say, hey, my knee hurts? What can happen if, say, I'm having an emotional issue with a family member or with a friend? Now you're categorized as, oh, no, we can't send this guy to the field. Why? Because it's happened. Maybe looking at things in a different perspective, like you've been able to show and display in this presentation, not only does it help commanders, supervision, and fellow airmen, but it paints a better picture other than hiding the pain, rather than being able to deal with it to move along and overcome that problem, that issue, that grief that you have to bear with on a daily basis, which hurts and is troubling. But thank you.
Thank you, Alex, for those comments. Retired Air Force too. And you know, I can see where that can be viewed that way, because we talk about resilient all the time. Hey, you got to be strong, you got to be tough. Well, sometimes you don't feel strong and tough. Sometimes you feel defeated. And hey, that's okay sometimes. And I get it, because we're always going, you got to be resilient. Let me help you be resilient. We have all this stuff for you to be strong and resilient. Well, it's okay to be weak sometimes. And it doesn't mean that you're not a strong military personnel because you feel sometimes weak. So I can see how we can turn it around. And when we talk a lot about resilient and all that, we don't give the space for the trauma and the grief, for the suffering, for the pain, to be able to be true to it and real with it. And as a chaplain, that's one of the biggest things that we offer, because we have total confidentiality, 100%. So they know they can come to us and nothing, there is no exceptions. But Alex, thank you for that. I understand, and I can see how that can be viewed that way in our military. Unless there's any other comment, I want to say thank you to everybody. And again, if you want the full project, there's 100 pages, and then we have like 20 or 35 slides. You can email me and I'll send it to you. More than welcome to have it. Use the slides however you want, change them and do whatever you need to them. So again, I want to thank you. I want to thank you for spending this time with me and having this discussion and conversation. So you all have my email. If there's anything I can do to help you or in your ministries, please just let me know. Blessings and have a good night.
Thank you, Javi. I want a hard copy signed by you.
Okay, we'll work something on that.
There you go.
All right, my friends. Bye.